Good afternoon. You are joining us live for this month's episode of Science Stream. Welcome. We'll be starting our broadcast in a bit. Meanwhile, please make yourself comfortable and let us know your opinion through the first of many polls today. Which of the COVID-19 vaccine do you think is the best? A. Pfizer-BioNTech, B. Sinovac, C. Oxford-AstraZeneca, or D. They are all equal. Okay, so join us on Facebook to participate in the live poll and click on one of the options below. Okay, don't worry, as we won't be able to identify who answered what, not even us, right? So let us know what you think. Which of the COVID-19 vaccine do you think is the best? A. Pfizer-BioNTech, B. Sinovac, C. Oxford-AstraZeneca, or D. They're all equal. If you have any questions for our guests, you're welcome to leave them in the comment section. See you shortly. Hello once again, especially to those who have just joined us. I'm Sean from TechDome Penang, Penang's very own Science Discovery Centre. Malaysia's national COVID-19 immunisation program has picked up pace in recent weeks and is now recording one of the highest daily vaccination rates per capita in the world. Malaysia's arsenal of vaccines comprises mainly those produced by Pfizer-BioNTech, Oxford-AstraZeneca and Sinovac. There has been much discussion on the efficacy of these vaccines, especially against emerging variants. But is the comparison of the respective trial results a true reflection of one vaccine being superior than another? Consultant cardiologist Dr. Ong Hean Teik will elucidate for us the COVID-19 vaccines, types and trials in this month's episode of Science Stream. Dr. Ong has been working as a cardiologist in Penang since 1990. He's a fellow at the Malaysian Academy of Medicine, the Royal College of Physicians of Edinburgh, the American College of Cardiology, and the European Society of Cardiology. Dr. Ong is the past president of the Penang Medical Practitioners Society, past chairman of Malaysian Medical Association branch in Penang, and past editorial board member for the Medical Journal Malaysia. He has academic articles published in numerous international journals and spoke at public forums during the SARS and H1N1 outbreaks in Penang. Without further ado, please join me to welcome Dr. Ong to Science Stream. Welcome
Hello.
to Science Stream, Dr. Ong. Thank you for agreeing to be with us today.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you, TechDome, Sion, and all your wonderful background staff for inviting me this afternoon.
So, Dr. Ong, I know you have an extensive presentation for us today, but before we begin, we have already asked the audience one opinion poll. Let's look at the results of the first opinion poll. Okay, so we asked which COVID-19 vaccines do you think is the best? The majority says that all are equal. Okay, I think Dr. Ong, you'll be glad to hear that. Well, Sinovac is second and Pfizer is third. No one picked AstraZeneca. So, okay. Before we proceed, Dr. Ong, do you have anything to comment
No, I
regarding
don't
this
think I have
poll?
anything to comment yet. I think you can carry on with the next poll or whatever
Okay,
it is.
all right. So before we proceed, let's have the second opinion poll for today. All right. So the second opinion poll do we have before you start your presentation? In your opinion, all right, in the audience opinion, what is the role of the COVID-19 vaccines? All right. Is it A, prevent from being infected by COVID-19, or B, prevent from complications, hospitalization, and death from COVID-19, or C, all of the above? Okay. So you know what to do. Click on the options below. All right. The floor is yours, Dr. Ong.
Okay. Now, Fatin, can we have the slides? Okay. Hello, everybody, and thank you for spending your Saturday afternoon here with us. I shall be talking on types and trials about the vaccines. Next, please. Now, the problem with COVID-19 is that it is actually a very new disease. On top of that, information comes fast and information keeps changing. In fact, my last slide for this talk was prepared at just before 2 p.m. today. So information comes very fast. Normally, we analyze information and then we reach a conclusion. The problem is a lot of people have already made a conclusion first and then selectively pick up information to support their conclusion that had already been made. Information also reaches doctors, the newspapers, the media, politicians, and the public all at the same time. And these four groups sometimes react differently and sometimes reach different conclusions. It makes matters worse when the media and doctors sometimes talk like politicians, and then the public engage in producing media through WhatsApp and everywhere else, talking like doctors. So this greatly adds to the all-round confusion. So I think it is very important for all of us, doctors included, and perhaps especially doctors, because they tend to have preconceived minds. In these fast-changing times, we must think and we must analyze fairly. Next, please. So, the talk is mainly going to be on actually how do we read medical trials and what do all these vaccine trials tell us. Next. Vaccines are not new. They have been around since over 2000 years ago, and they essentially involve giving the patient a light infection so that the patient is protected from a subsequent serious infection. The way to give the patient a light infection can be to take some secretion from a patient with the disease, then make the secretion weaker, and then give it to the patient to produce a mild infection. Another way of doing it is to give the patient a different type of infection, but the infection is very close to the dangerous one, like in the famous case of the British physician Dr. Edward Jenner, who gave cowpox virus secretions to people to prevent them from getting the dangerous smallpox, which can kill. So getting a mild infection to prevent you from a serious infection is the basis of vaccination, which has been around for more than 2,000 years. Next. For COVID-19, there are four main types of vaccines. The first one uses the traditional method of getting the COVID virus, inactivate it, and introduce it to give you a mild COVID infection and then protect you from a severe one. Sometimes, instead of giving you the whole virus, they just give you a part of the COVID virus, what they call the protein subunit vaccine. And thirdly, they do not give you the COVID virus, but they give you a different virus, an adenovirus, but they take out the adenovirus part and include inside a part of the COVID or the material that will tell your cell to make a part of the COVID. This is called the carrier virus vaccine. They use a virus of another type to carry information that will tell your cells to make COVID. And finally, instead of having a carrier virus, they just produce the genetic material that codes the production of the COVID virus and gives it to you, what you call the mRNA vaccines. There are 4 types of vaccines around. Next. And the many vaccines you have are all one of these types. The BNT vaccine is actually made by the German company, but given to Pfizer to manufacture in most of the world, but in China and East Asia, given to Fosun, is an mRNA vaccine. It's very effective. It gives you a genetic code that makes your body produce a part of the COVID virus. The main problem with it is that it requires very cold storage, minus 70 degrees during transport. The Sinovac and more recently the Sinopharm, which also has been licensed in Malaysia, are both inactivated vaccines using the traditional method of making the COVID vaccine inactive and giving it to you. And this is a well-documented method that has a long history of safety. The AstraZeneca is a viral vector vaccine, as are many others. And the thing about viral vector vaccine is that they use adenovirus, introduce the material that will code for the COVID virus into the adenovirus and give it to you. Problem with AstraZeneca, and perhaps that's why nobody voted for it, is that it has got a bad reputation after being associated with a condition, a rare condition of blood clots together with low platelets. Normally, when people have low platelets, they bleed. But in this particular condition, the patient after vaccination get low platelets and blood clots. And because of that, it has been withheld in certain countries, while its use has been restricted to the older population group in others. The government of Malaysia has recently also licensed the J&J and CanSino vaccines. These are also viral vector vaccines. And the good thing about these 2 vaccines are that they are single-dose vaccine. So you only need 1 injection. Now, this is especially important because if you have rural areas where people find it difficult to reach the vaccination center, they will not come if they have to come many times, and there will be big dropouts of people not completing the 2 required doses. In America, there are 17 million people who have taken 1 dose but have not turned out for the 2nd dose. So this is a major problem. There are many other vaccines around, the Sputnik, the Moderna, the Novavax. And just to tell you how many there are, about a month ago, China was reported to already have approved 7, with 71 others under production. So you're going to hear about a lot more vaccines to come. Next. Now, they all work. The blue graph shows the number of COVID patients with time in the unvaccinated. And if you had the Pfizer vaccine, you get the red line, which is much lower than the blue graph. Now, if you look at the figures below, vaccine efficacy, if you look at the vaccine efficacy figure, you'll find that for the BNT vaccine, it's claimed to be efficacious to 95%. Next slide. Okay, this is for the AstraZeneca, and you see very wide divergence between the unvaccinated COVID cases and the much lower COVID cases for patients who have had the vaccine. Next. This is the data from the, I think it is the Sinovac vaccine, which was just published. Look at the bold figures below in the Lancet, which is one of our top medical journals, on July the 8th, giving a vaccine efficacy of about 84%, similar, much lower cases amongst the vaccinated group. Next. This is the Sinopharm vaccine. Since it has just been approved, I've added the slide to show an effect of between 73 to 78%, depending on which type of Sinovac. There are 2 types of Sinovac vaccine that were tested in the trial. Next, please. Now, what about side effects? Now, if you look at the graph and you look at the arrow on your left shows local side effects. The arrow on the left shows local side effects, while the parts on the right show the generalized side effects. And after the Pfizer vaccine, you get local pain, which is quite common. Up to 70 to 80% of the people will have some form of pain at the injection site. And for the generalized side effects, if you look at the two up pointing arrows below, you will find that fatigue and muscle ache, generalized muscle pain, fatigue, they're all quite common after the vaccine. 50%, 60% of people may be getting those sort of complaints. Next. This is the side effect of the, one back please. This is the side effect profile of the Sinovac vaccine. And if you look at the first chart, the total adverse effects occur in about, that's right. Look at the first graph on the left-hand side, the first arrow, you will find that about 20% of people will have, side effects from the Sinovac vaccine. And when it comes to pain, it is much less. So when people feel no pain with Sinovac, it's quite understandable because in the trial, only about 2% of them will get pain. So Sinovac generally painless, but they do have fatigue. Up to 8% of people will get some form of fatigue, and up to 20% of people will have some form of side effect, much lower than the Pfizer side effect of between 50 to 70%. Next, please. And for Sinopharm, this shows the Sinopharm side effects the two types of Sinopharm vaccine being tested in the trial compared to the third graph. The third graph is the placebo group getting no active vaccine. And if you look at the occurrence of the side effects, they are all very similar, meaning that the Sinopharm vaccine is relatively free of side effects. Next, please. Now, look at this graph again. Look at the arrow. This is for the Pfizer vaccine. And overall, on the right-hand side, if you look at the heading, it says vaccine efficacy. And if you look at the figure where the arrow is, it is 95%. So overall, it is 95% effective for the Pfizer vaccine, and it is across all age groups, across both male and female sex, all races, and in different countries. Next, please. So the trials have answered the questions that they asked. And the answer is that during this COVID epidemic, the vaccines can be safely given to reduce attacks of symptomatic COVID. So COVID incidence drops when people take the vaccine. The vaccines are safe. The side effects, although present, tend to be local and of short duration. So we are in a COVID pandemic, ladies and gentlemen, so the message is get vaccinated. Next, please. Now, there is, however, much we do not know. There are many questions that are unanswered. To say these things that we don't know and we cannot answer is not the same as saying that we are hiding information, we are covering up mistakes, or we are trying to tell lies. This is something that is important, because only when we acknowledge that we don't know can we seek the answer and can we improve. This is a science stream webcast, and so to a thinking audience, as thinking people, I think we want to recognize that all the trials have weaknesses. What are the weaknesses in the trials? Well, for many of the trials, they have no Asian centers. The trials are very short in duration. The trials looked at only a very small number of COVID cases. Now, while we have thousands and 15,000 COVID cases in Malaysia today, you'll be very surprised to see how many COVID cases there were in the trials. So they only studied those number of COVID cases to produce the conclusion. The way the trials was done was inconsistent, even in the definition of disease, the doses they gave, and even the interval between the doses. We do not know if different subgroup of patients, that means patients with high blood pressure, with diabetes, with heart disease, whether they react differently. We know that COVID will affect them differently. Do the vaccines protect them differently? We cannot tell. The trials do not look for asymptomatic COVID. Now, in our present situation now, a lot of people are tested and many are positive without realizing it. They are totally comfortable, no fever, no symptom, no complaint, but they have COVID. The trials did not test for this type of COVID infections. And finally, there are changing variants now, and we do not know how the vaccine will work in the setting of these different variants. That is why all vaccines that are approved for emergency use only. But remember, we are in an emergency situation. So to say that the trials are weak does not mean that we want to avoid the vaccines. No, we are in an emergency COVID pandemic and we must get vaccinated. Next. So let's look at the trials. And if you look at this Pfizer trial, you will see that the percentage, look at the first arrow, the percentage of Asian patients is only about 4%. And if you look at the countries where the vaccine is studied, there's no Asian center. They were studied in Argentina, Brazil, South Africa, and the United States. Next. Now, look at this. In the Pfizer trial, the trial looked at 170 COVID cases. The trial produced 8 COVID cases amongst the people who were vaccinated, and they had 162 COVID cases in the unvaccinated group. At the time the trial was run, look at the arrow in the graph below, at the time the trial was done, there were over 200,000 cases of COVID in America a day. So 170 cases takes only 1.2 minutes to produce. So the trial looked at 1.2 minutes of the US daily experience. So the trial is actually a very small trial. It is the same with the AstraZeneca trial. They had 131 COVID cases, 30 in the vaccinated group, 100 in the control group. And at that time, in the UK, there were about 60,000 cases. So this was only 3 minutes of the UK daily experience. So the trials were actually of very small numbers of patients and a limited amount of data. Next, please. Now, this is how the books teach us about trials. Look at the phase 3, the highlighted clinical trial. Normal trials for new drugs, new vaccine run for several years, and there has to be good randomization, double blind, to eliminate bias. That means that the patients given the vaccine and the patients given nothing, the placebo group, must be the same so as to eliminate any form of bias against the treatment. Next, please. Look at how long the trial was for the Pfizer vaccine. The median time was only 2 months. Look at AstraZeneca. The median follow-up after the first dose was 3.4 months, and after the second dose was only 2 months. So actually the trials were of very short duration. These trial reports were of the phase 3 trials, and remember the previous slide, the normal phase 3 trials should run for several years. Next, please. Now, to understand more about the trial results, I think we have to talk a bit about COVID-19 disease. Look at the graph there and look at the disease situation. In normal circumstances, there will be an incubation period where the patient feels well, then the patient will fall sick with disease, and then the patient will recover. During the period when the patient feels unwell, the patient can communicate the disease to others. The patient can spread the disease, but for a short period of time during incubation, when the patient is well, the patient can also spread the disease. That is the normal situation. The problem with COVID is that the patient can feel okay. That means be without symptoms throughout the period of disease. So the patient can feel fully well and yet be able to pass on the disease. The problem with COVID then is that the presentation, the cause and the outcome of the disease is variable, is unpredictable. We know that 20 to 30% of patients will have no symptoms whatsoever. They will feel totally well. 70% of them will be mild, 5% will be severe, and some will end up with long COVID. That means after recovery, still feel unwell. We also know that the elderly, the fat, those with hypertension, diabetes, those with heart, kidney, lung, neurological or malignant disease will all be affected differently by COVID. The outcome will be different. So after vaccination, we naturally should ask, is the prevention of asymptomatic, mild or severe COVID different? Can they protect these types of COVID disease differently? Is the protection for the older patient, the fat patient, those with hypertension, diabetes or organ damage, is it different in the ability of the vaccine to protect these groups? So to answer these questions, we actually need trials with good randomization to make sure that the two groups compared, the vaccinated, unvaccinated group, are similar. Next slide. Now, look at the baseline characteristic, the presentation for the Pfizer trial. You do not see patients showing their hypertension status, diabetes status, and other disease conditions. You do not see whether the group given the vaccine compared to the group not given the vaccine, the number of such patients are not given. Next. I take you through two good trials. I take you through two very good trials that have been done previously. The first is the HOPE trial, which asks the question, does giving this ramipril drug, which is an ACE inhibitor, does giving this drug to patients at high risk prevent heart disease? The follow-up was for 5 years, and the primary outcome, the thing they looked for, which is the combination of cardiovascular death or non-fatal heart attack or stroke, occurred in 1,477 patients. The next trial, the ALL-HAT trial, asked the question of whether one type of blood pressure drug is better than another in preventing heart disease. And again, the trial had a follow-up of 4.9 years, producing the outcome they want, which is either a fatal coronary heart disease or a non-fatal heart attack in 2,956 participants. Next, please. Now, look at the way the results are presented for HOPE. Look at the big arrow. It goes myocardial infarction. The two groups treated with ramipril and placebo group were shown to be equal in the number of heart attacks, myocardial infarction. Not only that, the various types of heart attack, was it within 1 year, was it over 1 year, clearly shown. And then the various types of heart disease before a heart attack, stable angina, unstable angina, whether patients had bypass or angioplasty, all were shown to be equal. Next, you had smokers. Next, you had those with peripheral vascular disease, hypertension, diabetes. Look, the trial results clearly showed that they were comparing two groups of patients who are equal in the distribution of these very important diseases. These diseases that can affect the outcome of the trial. Same in the two groups. Shown here for HOPE, not shown for the vaccine trials. Next, this is for the ALL-HAT trial, which asks the question, which antihypertensive drug is better? Is it crolothalidone or amlodipine or lisinopril? And again, look at the big arrow, blue arrow, pointing to blood pressure. Not only was it shown that the blood pressure numbers or number of high blood pressure patients were the same, they even gave you the level of the blood pressure to show that they were the same. Then cigarette smokers again given, and then again the various types of heart disease, all clearly shown to be the same in the three group. And then they even had tests done on them by echocardiogram, by electrocardiogram, all shown to be the same in the three groups. Next, please. Look at that. This is for the Pfizer vaccine trial, and you see no subgroup differentiation by their status of obesity, hypertension, diabetes, or whether they had heart disease or any type of disease. No subgroup differentiation whatsoever. If your placebo group had more diabetic patients, more hypertensive patients, more fat patients, then of course they are going to get more COVID disease and more severe COVID disease. We do not know the baseline features. Next, please. Look at the HOPE trial. When they present the results for the HOPE trial, they showed that whether patients had cardiovascular disease, whether they had diabetes, hypertension, whether they had coronary heart disease, prior myocardial infarction, cerebrovascular disease, in all these subgroups of patients, the results held the same. Next. Not shown for the vaccine trials. Now, look at the vaccine trials again. They did not look for asymptomatic COVID, which we know can occur 20 to 30% of the time. The BNT or Pfizer trial, to qualify for testing, you must have symptoms. And what are the symptoms? Look at that. Fever more than 38 degrees, or a list of any of the following before you can get tested for COVID. That means that if you have a fever 37.5, you will not be tested. If you have had a fever 2 days ago, you will not be tested, because in the trial, they had very strict criteria, and their testing for COVID only comes about when you have symptoms. Same thing for AstraZeneca. In UK and Brazil, you must have a temperature above 37.8. In South Africa, they had broader definition of what qualifies you for testing. And in UK, they did look for asymptomatic COVID. That means patients were given a test kit to test for themselves at home. So this Astra trial done in UK, Brazil, South Africa had different methodology for different groups of patients. Now, this is a big no-no, and under ordinary times, these sort of trials will not be publishable. But these are emergency times, and the trial results are published. You must always remember we are in pandemic emergency times. Next, please. See, let's talk about the methodology of the Astra trial. They had different criteria for COVID testing, and they used different doses. Interval between doses was different, and they even mixed up the doses. So as I mentioned, in UK, Brazil, the symptoms for testing was different from South Africa, which was broader. And in certain centers in the UK, they even look for asymptomatic infection. So certainly the criteria leaves much to be desired. Now look at what happened in the UK. 2 dosage groups were used. They had one group that was given a low dose followed by a standard dose, while another group had 2 standard doses of the Astra vaccine. You know, here we complain that we were not given vaccine, so don't worry too much, because in the UK, they mixed up the dose and they gave some patients low dose first and only the full dose later on, you know. In Brazil, they were supposed to give patients the dose 4 weeks apart, but some received it 12 weeks apart. So even the interval between the doses in a trial was not well coordinated and centralized, you know. And in South Africa, the same thing happened, you know. Patients receive less than the full dose. They receive a half dose, sometimes as the first, sometimes as the second dose. So even in a trial, there was a lot of mixed up in the Astra methodology. Certainly leaves, certainly not a good trial. Next, please. Now, what about Sinovac? You see, Sinovac has been approved in 22 countries, and trials are done in Brazil, Turkey, and Indonesia. We got a lot of media reports that it's effective. Turkey is effective, Indonesia 65% in the trial, but 95-98% in the media by the Ministry of Health in use against death hospitalization. Uruguay very effective. Now, I want to touch a bit on this town of Serena. There's a lot of politics in Brazil, probably worse than ours, but this particular town went through a study called Project S, where the whole population of the town, 27,000 over of them, between February to April, were given vaccination. And they compared the COVID status in that town compared to the rest of Brazil. And on the 1st of June, they found that the Sinovac vaccine was 95% effective against death, 86% against hospitalization, and 80% in preventing symptoms. So good evidence of value in use. But next, now this is the one that you always read about. This unpublishable trial on Sinovac run by the Butantan Institute in Brazil that produced a 50.4% effective effect. Okay, they looked at almost 10,000 people, and again, a very short trial. They looked at it at least 14 days. They didn't say average how long. They produced about 250 cases, but their definitions were bad. Now, you see, the AstraZeneca trial, because they had the backing of the University of Oxford, even though methodology was bad, got the paper published. But when you are a Chinese drug studied in Brazil, when your definitions are not clear and confusing, you cannot get your paper published. They recruited 5 types of patient, but when they presented the results, it was only in 3 groups: mild, moderate, or severe. But when they recruited asymptomatic, very mild, moderate, grave. So it is a bad trial because definitions are not clear. And when they produced the results for those who read papers had wide confidence interval. When you have a wide confidence interval, it means there's no confidence in the results. It can be wrong. And then some results appeared with an effect of 100%, and the 95% confidence interval includes this 100%, all of which means that statistically, the trials are not very believable. So the trials, till today, the Butantan Institute trial is unpublished. And the Butantan Institute trial, of course, got Sinovac a bad reputation. 50% effect compared to Pfizer's 95% effect, which is highlighted across all the Western media. But the good thing from this bad trial is that they tried to look at the vaccine effect on different types of COVID. They tried to distinguish whether vaccines can protect you against the severe, the moderate, or the mild form of disease. Does the vaccine have different effect in preventing this different type of disease? And for the first time, they suggested that the vaccine might be good at preventing severe COVID or death, but might be weaker in preventing mild disease. That's why you get a 50% effect for mild disease, 78% effect for moderate, but 100% effect on severe. They suggested this. Next slide, please. So it is fair to say that the Sinovac, the Pfizer, the Astra trials are all not strong. And when I say this, do I say it with a good backing, or is it just a weak statement that I make? Now in December 2020, the Pfizer vaccine went for FDA approval. And before the Food and Drug Administration approves it, they always call an expert committee to vote. There were 21 people in the expert committee, 17 voted to approve, 4 voted against. That means 4 of the experts, almost 20%, felt that given the evidence, the vaccine cannot be approved. Too short, too small numbers, not clear definition of different disease types and different patient types. So at a time when the United States was seeing over 200,000 cases a day, seeing deaths in the thousands, experts, 20% of them voted that the trial was not good enough to be approved. Until today, the Astra vaccine is not FDA approved. So there is good evidence that the trials do not reach the standard of what we doctors are comfortable with. But one must be understanding. It is very difficult to do a good clinical trial during a pandemic. Look at the picture below, and it shows the queue outside the hospital in New York. At that time, the coronavirus cases in the state of New York surged to more than 20,000, more than half were in New York City, 10,000 cases in New York City. New York City has a population of 8 million, 1/4 of Malaysia's. So yesterday we had 1,500 cases and we were very worried. Can you imagine Malaysia at 40,000 cases? And that was the situation New York City was facing. So facing this type of pandemic, how do you expect the doctors of New York to be able to do a good clinical trial? So we must understand the circumstances we are under when we judge people retrospectively. Next. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, please don't ask which vaccine is better. This question is not studied. This is the All-Head trial again, which I said compared 3 different types of antihypertensive drugs. Look at it. they had 3 groups of patients on 3 different antihypertensive drugs. They produced 2,956 events that they want, and they followed up for 5 years. So if you want to know which vaccine is better, you need 3 groups of patients to be vaccinated with 3 different vaccines. You need to produce almost 3,000 cases of COVID, and you need to follow them up for 5 years. Then perhaps you can have an answer which vaccine is better. That trial has not been done and perhaps cannot be done. Next slide, please. So we must not ask the question which vaccine is better. We don't know, we have had no trial. The important thing we have to do is what is the consistent message from the trials? What have we learned from all these trials, which doctors went to great effort to do, companies went to great effort to fund, patients sacrificed themselves for it to be done? What is the message that consistently comes out? And the Sinovac Brazil trial, bad as it was, showed something. It suggested that the vaccine is good for preventing severe COVID and death. It is weaker for preventing mild COVID. Is it true also for the Pfizer trial? Is it true for the Astra trials? That is the important question to ask. Next, please. Now, look at this. In the Pfizer trial, there were 170 cases. As I mentioned, 8 in the vaccine group, 162 in the placebo or non-vaccinated group. But look at the highlighted part. In going through the documents, researchers found that there were 2,410 suspected but unconfirmed COVID. Why unconfirmed? Because they were never tested. Why were they not tested? Because they were only tested if the temperature exceeded 38. So if the temperature was 37.8, they would not be tested. And there were 3,400 of such patients who came out and said they were unwell but were never tested. In other words, there were 20 times more suspected than confirmed cases. Now, if you looked at the confirmed cases, the risk reduction is 95%. The vaccine effect suggests that it is 95% good at reducing cases. But when you look at the suspected cases and add it into the confirmed cases, the effect drops to 19%. And if you say that you mustn't get them from the time they're vaccinated, you must wait 7 days after vaccination to show that the vaccine has some effect. If you add only the cases that came about, the suspected cases after 7 days of vaccination, the effect of the vaccine is only 29%. It looks like, again, for the confirmed cases, which means patients are sick enough to be tested, that is the more severe COVID, the vaccine is very effective. But when you include the suspected, that means the milder COVID, where patients did not qualify for testing, it is not so effective. So again, the same thing with the Sinovac trial. The vaccine appears very effective against severe COVID that is tested, but not very effective for the milder COVID, which is not tested for. Next, please. Now, this was the slide I added at 2 p.m. today, because this just came out yesterday from the Ministry of Health in Israel, that the Pfizer vaccine was 39% effective in preventing infections, but 88% effective against hospitalization, 91% effective against severe illness. The chart presented yesterday by the Israeli Health Ministry with adequate references and definition, a very good chart. Again, emphasizing this point that against mild COVID, not very effective, but against COVID, bad enough to be hospitalized, or severe, bad enough to need oxygen, very effective. Next slide. Now, this is the Singapore experience. Singapore uses Pfizer, uses another mRNA vaccine, Moderna, and these are results up until 21st July. Looking at the cases, they had 948 cases of patients in the last month. Look at that, 412 vaccinated patients got COVID. 536 unvaccinated or patients with 1 dose vaccination had COVID. The population of Singapore is now 50% vaccinated. So both groups, vaccinated and unvaccinated, should be equally large. 50% of Singapore's population, but 412 vaccinated got COVID, 536 partially or unvaccinated got COVID. And if you look at the risk reduction here, it is 23%, right in the middle of Peter Doshi's calculation of 19 to 29% when you include the suspected COVID cases in the trial. So in actual fact, again, the point comes out that when you talk of mild COVID, the vaccine is not very effective, 19 to 29% effective. But when you talk of severe COVID, once vaccinated, you will not get severe COVID. Okay, from Singapore. Next, please. Now, what about the Astra trial? Ladies and gentlemen, look at the figures. The Astra trial had 30 COVID in the vaccinated group, 101 COVID in the control group, producing an overall effect of about 70%. When they break it up by the dose, remember they said there was a mix-up of dose, LS, low dose, ST, standard dose, and another one, 2ST, 2 standard dose. So the low dose followed by the standard dose group, efficacy 90%. 2 standard dose group, efficacy 62%. Now, when you look at the trial, you are shocked. Why would patients being given a lower dose produce higher effect than patients who receive 2 full doses? 2 full doses, 62%. Half dose followed by full dose, 90%. This trial cannot be logical enough for someone to accept. But it is right, it is logical because, please click at next. It is logical because of this. The low dose standard dose group looked only for symptomatic COVID. Remember, in Brazil and in South Africa, you have symptoms qualify to be tested. Now, if you have symptoms and you meet the criteria more than 37.8, get tested, you are 90% effective. Remember, in UK, in parts of it, they gave the test to the patient to test themselves. So even without symptoms, they tested. So when you have 2 full doses, despite having 2 full doses, if you are testing for asymptomatic disease, it's not effective, only 62% effective. So when testing for the mild disease, the asymptomatic disease, not effective. When tried against the severe symptomatic disease, AstraZeneca is very good. So again, showing similar results with Pfizer, with Sinovac. It is good against severe symptomatic disease, not so good against the asymptomatic disease. Next, please. Now, the J&J vaccine, which is just being approved in Malaysia, single-dose vaccine, and if you look at the 2 arrows, this report of the trial result showed the same thing, an effect more against severe disease and weaker against the moderate COVID. So if you look at the right-hand side, the effect of the vaccine against severe disease is about 81%, whereas against the moderate disease is about 62%. So again, showing that vaccines are better at preventing severe disease, not so strong at preventing mild disease. Next, please. Let us now look at the evidence of use around the world, because remember, the trials were about 2 months, 3 months long, but the drugs, the vaccines were accepted and used from January onwards, and now it's July. So we have had more than 6 months of experience with practical vaccine use. What is our experience with the vaccine around the world? Next, please. Now, this is a result that came out from Chile. And if you look at the right-hand corner, that the effect is overall is about 60%, but when you talk about the effect against hospitalization, ICU admission, and against death, it is much higher. The effect against hospitalization, 86%, ICU, 90%, and against death, 87%. Next slide, please. This result from Chile was only published on July the 7th, and they looked at 10.2 million residents in Chile, 4.2 million unvaccinated, 5.5 million had full vaccination. Look at the number of COVID cases. Over 200,000 cases they saw, 22,000 hospitalization, 7,000 ICU admission, 4,000 deaths. 66% effective in preventing COVID, but 88% against hospitalization, 90% against ICU admission, 86% against death. Again, very good at preventing severe COVID and death, not so good at preventing mild COVID. Next. Okay, this is the graph. Look at the graph of the United Kingdom and the Netherlands. Look, these two countries had high vaccination rates. In the United Kingdom, they had 79,000 doses of vaccine for a population of 66 million. 79 million vaccine doses for a population of 66 million. The Netherlands had 17 million vaccine doses for a population of 11 million. Very well vaccinated populations. But look at the graph. The COVID cases went down, but look at the United Kingdom. It's going up again. It went up to 50,000, 40,000. Now it's around 40,000 level in the United Kingdom. With opening, cases went up. Same thing with the Netherlands. Cases went up. But look at the death rates. The death rates have not gone up. So in places where the vaccination is high, cases will rise with opening because the vaccine is not good at preventing the mild or asymptomatic case. In the United Kingdom, you can self-test with kits that the government give you. So a lot of people test and they find themselves positive, but they are mild infections, sometimes asymptomatic infection. And the deaths are low with vaccination because the vaccine successfully prevents the severe illness. Next. Look at South Africa. In South Africa, look, the cases are high, but look at the vaccine status. Only 2 million vaccination given for a population of 58 million. So they are unable to deliver the vaccine. They tried to use Pfizer and J&J. And because of supply issues, they are not a rich country, the orders came in late, they have poor refrigeration chains, they could not deliver the vaccine to the arm of the patient. So vaccination rate low, the cases are high, the death rates are high. And so what do? They had to approve emergency, the Sinovac vaccine, which doesn't require so cold storage. So sometimes it is not which vaccine is better. Better sometimes looking good for the country, bringing the country more profit, or what they think is 95%. But the question to ask is, which vaccine can you give quickly to your people successfully into their arm? That is the important matter. Which vaccine can you get? Not which vaccine produces better paper results. Next, please. 2 European countries stand out. Serbia with a population of 7 million. The cases were as high as 8,000 a day. It's now down to less than 100. They use Sinopharm, Sputnik, and Pfizer. Look at Hungary, population of 10 million. Cases as much as 10,000 a day. Now, for a population of 10 million, to have 10,000 cases is like us, Malaysia, having 35,000 cases a day. So more than double what we had yesterday. Every day, that's what Hungary faced, But today, Hungary's cases are close to zero. Some days zero, some days in the teens. Deaths are down to zero. What vaccine they use? They use everything they can. Astra, Sinopharm, Sputnik, Pfizer, Moderna. So maybe the answer is you have to use as many types of vaccine as you can get. Don't be choosy. Use whatever is available. These 2 European countries are in the middle of Europe and not too far from Russia, and they use the Sputnik vaccine, because it is available. Sinopharm, whatever they can get, they use. Next, please. So let us now talk again of our neighbor down the south because they produce quite good data. And up to the end of June, they have recorded 6,600 adverse reaction to their vaccination program. 120 per 100,000 doses, very low. Serious adverse effects under 5 per 100,000. In the young, the adverse reaction is similar to the old, but when you look at the adverse effects specific to the heart, myocarditis, pericarditis, Overall, 0.22 per 100,000 dose, but in the young men, it is 1.24 per 100,000. So young men have to be careful of side effects on the heart with the mRNA vaccine, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine. The other complication of the low platelet blood clot situation with Astra, if you are over 50, very low incidence, 1 per 100,000. But if you are young, under 50, it's 2 per 100,000. Now, to put it in practical terms, if you vaccinate the entire population in France, in the age group 20 to 40, you will save 10 people from COVID, but you will kill 21 from the blood clot. So you've got to understand this risk balance ratio. We want to save people from COVID, but we do not want to cause problems and kill them in another way. So in general, the adverse reaction from the vaccines are very rare. We have had more than 6 months of active vaccine use around the world. The adverse effects are very rare. Clearly, the benefits are more than the risk during our pandemic. Get vaccinated. But you must look at which vulnerable group you are. If you are a young person, your chance of dying from COVID is very low, and you should not use the vaccine that can have a bad side effect from you, as the calculation from France shows. Next, please. Now, we have a problem here because a lot of media is not fair and objective in their description of news. There is a political or sometimes a commercial angle to the way they report the news. See, Israel has started administering a booster shot for Pfizer. That's true. For certain patients that they deem at high risk, the immunosuppressed, they give a third Pfizer dose. And as you can see from their graph, the effect from Pfizer, they feel is only about 40%. But when this gets reported, no one questions the effectiveness of the Pfizer vaccine. There has been a lot of reports of the effectiveness of the Sinovac vaccine because people are talking about a booster dose for Sinovac. So a booster dose may or may not be required, but it has now taken a spin to cast out on the value of the vaccine. That is not the case because every vaccine now seems to be thinking about the requirement for a booster dose. There is a report in the Berita Harian, the AstraZeneca vaccine protects lifelong. if it protects lifelong, why are vaccinated people in the UK catching COVID? 47% of people with COVID in UK are vaccinated, so how to protect when the number of cases keep rising? So sometimes the headlines and what you see totally doesn't make sense, This is another one. The BNT vaccine produces 10 times more antibodies than Sinovac. Well, immunity does not depend on antibody level. And actually, the FDA has issued a statement saying you must not measure antibodies to see whether you are immune, especially after vaccination, because the immunity does not depend on the antibodies. It depends on other things, your B cell, T cell, mast cell, your complement. So yet, when BNT produces a lot of antibodies, it is said to be more effective. In fact, it might be because it produces more inflammation, and that's why there's more pain with the Pfizer vaccine and more fatigue with the Pfizer vaccine. We do not know. The higher the antibody level is stated by the FDA as not indicative of better immunity, and yet they try to imply that in the newspapers. And then there is a report that mixing Pfizer and Astra vaccine gives good protection. But when people talk of mixing the Sinovac and other vaccines, it is said because Sinovac is weak. But when you talk of mixing Pfizer and Astra, it's not because they are weak. And in fact, this is something that has come up because the vaccines come from different groups. There is a thought that if you have had a vaccine from this group, for your booster, you should get from another group. Because once you have had the inactivated, perhaps an mRNA, you have had the mRNA, perhaps the viral carrier, or perhaps the inactivated. So these are research things that are going on, questions being asked, and not because of any weakness of any particular brand. Now, Many people are talking about COVID-19 becoming like the flu. Let us look at flu vaccination. How effective are flu vaccinations? Between 40 to 60%. This comes from the FDA. Every year, the effect of the flu vaccine is between 40 to 60%, and it varies during different seasons because the vaccine might not be compatible with the strain at that time. So it varies 40 to 60%. And really, if COVID-19 is like a flu, then we are likely to need annual boosters because you need annual flu vaccination. And you are likely to need different vaccines because the different strains in circulation can be different in different years. Next, please. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we must look beyond the headlines. In the UK, vaccinated people make up 47% of COVID cases. 33,000 people were catching the virus in the middle of July. It has since gone up to closer to 40,000. That is because the vaccine prevents serious COVID. It cannot prevent mild asymptomatic disease. So when you look at the total number of cases, you cannot make much difference or bring it down dramatically. It is the same across all vaccine types. And then when Malaysia decides not to use Sinovac because of supply issues, it is taken to mean that Sinovac is no good, when the truth is that Sinovac will be sold in the private centers. Next, please. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, all vaccines very effective against severe disease, less effective against mild asymptomatic COVID. Cases go down with lockdown, open on opening. And the reason why our cases cannot come down is because we are opening during a lockdown. So we are causing problems there, you see. Masking, SOPs are very, very important to keep cases down. So even after vaccination, to keep cases down, you must maintain SOPs. There is a problem in Singapore now because the message that was given was that vaccination will prevent cases. And now people have been vaccinated, but they see that the vaccinated are catching COVID, and there is great unhappiness about the message. The actual message is that vaccination will keep severe COVID down. Vaccination will relieve the stress on our healthcare centers and so make life almost normal again. But you can catch COVID and you must have SOP. Next. So we are in an emergency situation. You have to obey the laws, and the laws can be very different. You know, UK, 40,000 cases, can go party, can attend concert. Melbourne, 5 cases, lockdown 5 days, you know. Sydney, Sydney, 100 cases, another 2 weeks of lockdown, you know. So different people, governments react differently, we have to obey them. Otherwise, we get into trouble, as I have learned. Meanwhile, you have to protect yourself. You know. There is much we do not know. We are still learning. All vaccines appear to be similar. We must get vaccinated. They are very safe. They are approved by WHO, and they will prevent us from getting severely sick. We cannot just depend on the government, on the regulations. We protect ourselves by getting vaccinated so that we do not become severely sick with COVID. But the vaccines are less effective to prevent mild COVID and maybe the variant COVID. So during this pandemic, which is still ongoing, we must have SOP. Wear your mask, avoid contact, avoid close contact, wash hands, don't touch face, touch mouth. And there is too much politics, too much marketing in the media now. Got to be careful, look at it objectively, look at it scientifically. So get vaccinated, ladies and gentlemen. And with that, next please, but maintain SOP. I thank you very much. Okay, that's all.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Ong, for doing such a comprehensive research and distilling all that information to share with us in the past hour. Okay, so before there are some questions, quite a lot on ivermectin, but before we address that, so you mentioned about something similar to what we asked in the second poll, right? The problem with Singapore's messaging, and that's why now there are unhappiness. Okay, so let's have the poll results for the second one. Okay, so majority, I think it's 80%. Yeah, 80% says that is to prevent complications, hospitalization, and death. So only 20% thinks that it's meant for prevention of infection. So in a way, that's very good. At least even before listening to your talk,
They know,
our audience. So that's actually a very good sign. Dr. Ong, I guess it all started, a few months back when I think it was in April, when the director of the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention, at a conference, he did mention about the efficacy rates of the Chinese vaccines needs improvement. And he even suggested that maybe he can use heterologous vaccination instead. You mix with a different vaccine to improve efficacy. So maybe it is also partially that, and then that's where the press came in to harp on the issue. And since it came from China itself and also the director of the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention, that this has come to where we are now, that whenever anything negative is said about Sinovac, is taken quite strongly. What do you have to say? What's your opinion on this?
Okay, we are in Malaysia. I do not work for the CIA. I do not work for the PLA. And I think by being in Malaysia, we're very lucky. Like Serbia and Hungary, we can get the best of every world. We do not have US bases here. We are not a Chinese colony. So you must use the best everywhere. And to say that every vaccine needs improvement. Look, results have come out from Israel. Pfizer, 40%. You need a lot of improvement, you see. Unfortunately, there is a hype now because of nationalism. People want to say we are very good when actually we are very bad. In the United States, there are 33 million COVID cases. 10% of the population has had COVID. There are 600,000 COVID deaths, even more than India. India had a big spike, but still India has 3 times the population of America. Still not as many deaths. So when politicians are faced with a situation where they go wrong, and we shall not mention countries closer to Asia, when they face a situation where they go wrong, they come up with all kinds of statements saying it's not my fault, it's somebody else's fault. That's very common. And I think what vaccine do you need next? Personally, I had the Pfizer vaccine. My wife had the Sinovac. If I need a booster, I think I'll get Sinovac. If my wife needs a booster, I'll tell her probably get Pfizer. Because it's logical. It's like when we use antihypertensive drugs. And by the way, this debate I've gone through, because as a doctor now of 30 years, we've seen this, patients will ask, my high blood pressure medicine better than theirs, better than that. What type you want to use? That is a matter for the doctor to closely judge based on your circumstance. The message is take your antihypertensive pill. So the message is, please, when your turn comes for vaccination, get vaccinated. But remember SOP, remember masking. And then every vaccine needs to be improved. And what was said by the Chinese professor was said at a medical conference. So of course, in medical conference, we will say all these things. But even before he said that, when the Astra trial was published, the medical journals wrote about combining Astra with Sputnik. They already wrote that the very day the Astra trial came out, our journals described mixing, and nobody took it up to say Astra no good or Pfizer no good. By the way, the Pfizer CEO sold his shares on the day the Pfizer vaccine was approved. He sold his shares, you can go and check it out. Now, if the vaccine is that wonderful, would the CEO sell his shares? And by the way, all of us are suffering through COVID. But do you know Moderna executives earned 160 million last year from their company because the share price went out. So there's a lot of commercial reason. Besides this great power politics, there's a lot of business behind all these things. And even a Sinovac thing, I don't know how much business there is behind it. I just know all the trials have their weaknesses and all the vaccines have their strengths.
Yeah. I
Yes.
myself got the Sinovac vaccine, and we'll be getting those soon. I think it's fine. I like what the trial says. I only felt lethargic and soreness at the injection spot, but nothing else. Hopefully, the second dose will be okay as well. As you were presenting just now, we just got the news that today is record high again for Malaysia, nearly 16,000. So we are just less than 4,000 cases away from from hitting 1 million cases. So tomorrow we will surpass 1 million cases in Malaysia already. Dr. Ong, you mentioned about the antibody as well, that it may not be the right gauge of how well you are protected. Okay, so now there are tests available. There are some labs that are charging maybe 120 ringgit or so to do this antibody test. Okay, I think, like what you say, commercial reasons, they're leveraging on this fear of people getting cucuk angin and things like that, and fear of Sinovac not being so efficacious. So, what would you advise regarding this antibody test?
Don't do it. It's not I say no good, no. It's not I HT Ong. You see, HT Ong is not important, but it's what the authorities say. And by authority, we always go for our good medical journals. And then secondary, we look at regulatory bodies. This is the United States FDA. United States FDA says you cannot do antibody and say that that indicates level of protection. Very clear. But you can do antibody and say whether you have had COVID. And that one you can say, but your antibody might disappear. So if you have had no antibody, it doesn't mean you have not had COVID. That's why in most circumstances, antibody test not very useful. So to test your antibody and to say that the vaccine is given or not given, that's totally a big no-no. And the reason why the Pfizer vaccine is so good for producing antibody, by the way, it's 10 times the level of Astra. You say Sinovac, no good antibody, what about Astra? Pfizer vaccine is 10 times the level of Astra. Why? Because you give mRNA to produce the protein that will stimulates antibody. You understand, right? You give the part of the protein that stimulates the antibody, so of course you get very high antibody. So there's no doubt that mRNA vaccines will produce very high spikes of antibody. But as to whether it then protects you, that is a separate issue, because it's more than antibody. The antibody binds to the virus and must then be eaten by the mast cell, the B cell, and the macrophage. Now, whether this cascade comes in, you do not know, and the mRNA vaccines are antibody designed spike vaccines. So of course it will be very high. So, and then the other vaccines are not so much designed that way. So of course the spike will be less.
Okay.
So that's the answer to it.
All right. So we will start addressing the ivermectin one, the first one. What is the efficacy of ivermectin as a prophylactic and treatment of COVID-19?
Okay, ivermectin is not approved by WHO or FDA. And the time when they said it's no good is in March. So in March until now, as far as I've read, they have not changed their view. So you can't use. And about a month ago, the Ministry of Health of Malaysia has arrested a doctor and will charge him for using ivermectin. So as far as doctors are concerned, we cannot use ivermectin. I think that much is quite clear. But if I'm not mistaken, about 2 weeks ago in Indonesia, they emergency approved ivermectin. You have to check out on that. But somebody sent me something, I looked at it, it looks reasonable, but I didn't go and search it up. So Indonesia may have approved ivermectin. And recently, my friends asked me, because they stay in KL, and KL is very stressful, and I searched the data, and to me, the data looks good. That by July now, the information on ivermectin makes me feel that ivermectin is effective. But you've got to be careful here, Now, when you talk of prophylaxis, it means you take something to prevent an infection. Now, even if it's very safe, it's still a drug. If you are fully healthy, you can take vitamins, you can go out in the sun. Why you take a drug, you see? There are very few drugs that we say you can take to prevent disease. Even when it comes to hypertension and heart disease, our teaching is that we must have a lifestyle change first. You have high blood pressure, lose weight, exercise. And then 3 months later, we watch before we give you drug. If you are totally well, but getting old, scared of heart disease, we assess you and we do not straight away give you a pill. We are not supposed to do that anyway. So now, because COVID is in Selangor and you want to take ivermectin, I think advise against it. As to whether if you fall sick, you can take ivermectin or not, the evidence seems good. But unless you know the dose, unless you have a doctor who can guide you, and remember, doctors are not supposed to give it. So it becomes a very difficult issue. I feel the evidence favors it, but practically, can you use it? I would strongly advise people to read up a lot first. And certainly, if you have not had COVID, prophylactic, be very careful. Don't be like Donald Trump. No? He advised this hydroxychloroquine. Hydroxychloroquine can cause cardiac arrest. And in their trials, it did produce cardiac arrest. And then he even asked you to take Dettol. That one even worse, the FDA fellow almost wanted to cry when he said that. So I got to be very careful. All these things not safe. So I think ivermectin sounds good, but how to take is a matter that you have to read up very carefully at this stage. And then it's the same thing with the Chinese medicine. Now, a lot of people also, have this Chinese medicine and say it's very good. And when I saw it, I actually asked some friends who are Chinese physicians, and they were very horrified. They said, cannot take like that to prevent disease. So very similar to how we feel about medicine. You cannot take medicine just thinking that because it's being used, you have to use it in the right circumstance. So the Chinese physicians don't actually recommend you take the Chinese medicine that's going around prophylactically against COVID. It's not supposed to be like that.
I think the doctor that you mentioned, he also brought up that there's a private hospital in the Klang Valley that actually, although it's not supposed to be used, but then it was actually prescribed to treat a patient also in a
you see, the hospital, the ministry has said has a right to apply to use. That one can. They, as a hospital, apply ministry give localized approval. It can be done that way. So we have to be careful with all this hearsay because all drugs got side effects.
Yeah. So Amy also has the same question as just now. I think you quite covered it really. She's also curious about the use of ivermectin. I know she knows of a doctor who is taking it daily for weeks now. Don't know what to make of it, wonder how long he will continue taking it and at what cost to his health, if any, long-term consumption of ivermectin. What are their thoughts? I think there are people who actually are stocking up and considering this as well.
Not wise, not wise. Especially if you've been vaccinated. I recently, in the last few days, I've got some WhatsApp message from patients in Indonesia saying they're tested positive. And I asked them, have you been vaccinated? And they say yes. Then I say, don't worry. And the guys replied to me, said, yes, I'm doing my treadmill every day, So you see, because you keep testing yourself, you're going to find it positive. But once you're vaccinated, you should be quite good. So I think the first step you should do is try and get yourself vaccinated. Then if you are vaccinated, you are then not too worried. And nowadays, it looks like the vaccine are going to be much more easily available. By the way, Malaysia's vaccination rate is 400,000, 500,000, maybe worse to the worst, 300,000, I don't know. America's vaccination rate now is under 250,000 for a population 10 times our size. And their country is only 50% vaccinated. So there's a lot of resistance to vaccination there, So that is a bit sad now. And then they're going to say maybe PLA's fault or somebody's fault, I don't know. But you must get vaccinated. I think logically, that's what you should do.
Okay, so Hock Lim has a follow-up question regarding the Malaysian trial that you mentioned.
Yeah,
not this one yet, the other one. Okay. Yes. Any feedback on the Malaysian trial of ivermectin? The Malaysian trial.
Yeah. Hock Lim is a good friend and old schoolmate who is now in Australia, is it? And Hock Lim is just like the Americans and the Brazilians wanting to do trials during a COVID crisis. Your staff are so overworked. Like in New York, you have this queue outside you. How are the doctors going to do a proper trial? Or England, 60,000 cases a day. No wonder they mixed up the doses. So our trial centers are in the Klang Valley or in the big towns. Penang has a clinical research center. The big towns are now the most heavily stressed. Where got time to properly do a trial? So I think our trial results will not come for a while. And if Indonesia approves, and Indonesian situation was quite bad, we hope that there will be a cascade, and there are people who are now presenting and lobbying for ivermectin inclusion and use, and hopefully something good can come out of it. But actually, you must still remember, even if unvaccinated, if you are not obese, you have no organ damage, your chances of getting severe COVID not high, 5% only, 5 maximum 10%. That 30% is symptomatic, another 50-60% mild symptoms. So the numbers getting sick, when you look at it in a broadly, is not that bad, your odds. So if you maintain good diet, try and relax. And the worst thing now is cannot relax, you see. I think now is very bad. Nobody can relax. They get enough sunshine, get physically active. I think it's not too bad. Probably all that do more good than ivermectin. I don't know. Because I know, like for the heart, to prevent heart attacks, if you're physically active, you're not under stress, to maintain proper weight, it's much, much better than many drugs. And there are even studies to show that to do a angioplasty or bypass or take medicine is just as good as a physical exercise. The blocks can resolve, So I think lifestyle, positive attitude, much, much more to say for it.
He also has another question. It's in relation with vaccination as well. So can we vaccinate and take ivermectin at the same time?
I don't think there's any problem with that. I think this ivermectin, I cannot say yes, because, medically, I am guided by my my medical association and FDA. So while I say that the evidence looks good, I'm not promoting its clinical use. I know some people are. And actually, if you ask me how to use, I don't know because I have not read up. And the problem with reading up, I tell you what happened in March. March, when people ask me, I say, I think cannot. You know why I think cannot? I looked at 3 papers. One paper say very good. One paper say no effect whatsoever. One paper say mild effect, reduce hospitalization by 3 days. So I looked 3 papers, say 3 different things. Then my answer is, not yet lah. Today, when I look, more papers seem to say good. The meta-analysis showed that it's good. But then one paper got withdrawn because the data are not very reliable. So I think it's going to be good, but looks like not yet good enough for them to say yes. Whereas the vaccines are different. Vaccines, actually, when they were registered, you remember 20% of American doctors say not good enough. But in the following 6 months, despite a lot of scares, like with Astra, with other things, it showed itself to be very safe. So now we are quite clear, vaccines are it. So vaccine, yes. Ivermectin, don't know.
Okay, let's have another opinion poll, okay, before we go on to other questions. So the third opinion poll for today, would you pay for the booster dose? Okay, so let's just say you're on a Pfizer or Sinovac, you're on 2 dose, or AstraZeneca 2 dose. Would you go for a third dose? Will you pay for a third dose yourself? Or you're on Johnson & Johnson or CanSino, would you pay for the second dose? So let's just say the government would pay for the initial doses only. Would you pay for the booster dose yourself? Okay, so yes or no, right? So let us know about it. Okay, so Dr. Ong, so you say that the reopening during a lockdown is actually a problem, but we are actually already in a lockdown for some locations 3 months since May. Klang Valley, even Penang, we had our MCO announced beginning of May. So there are many, day traders, petty traders, they are suffering. They don't have that much reserves. So I'm sure with these 3 months not being able to do business, most definitely have depleted. So what should the government do? What would you advise? Because lockdown, but we're opening and things like that, is causing this. Of course, the minister in charge of vaccine is pushing for vaccination through surge capacity in Klang Valley, and that seeing quite a lot of vaccination happening already, being quite successful. Hopefully, it will bear results same like what we see at Labuan. But what would you recommend? What
Okay.
in your opinion?
Okay, before we talk Malaysia, I think it's good to look around us because we are all humans, and whether whatever racial group or regional area you stay in, we are still humans, Beneath that, blood is red, So that's all we are. Now, if you look at UK, 40,000 cases, they fully open up. If you look at Australia, 100 cases and they severely locked down. You look at Singapore, 150 community cases and government reintroduced measures, And now today, Sydney, Melbourne had riots, People are very upset. Our situation is no good. I drove by Burma Road today at the temple opposite Madras Lane. Normally when you drive by, you see one beggar, maximum 5 during festive times. Today, there were 20 people waiting for food. I think there must be people who go and do charity. It's very bad. So you can understand why there is pressure to open up. There's something wrong with my tap. I can't get a plumber. The fellow said too much work. Your water not flooded the house is not a problem. Cannot get for more than 1 week already. So because of administrative regulations, there is now a lot of problem. So you can well understand why the people in charge of finances will want to open up, while at the same time, the medical people will want to keep the cases down. We in Malaysia are not in a good situation, not because of our cases, but because of the stress on our hospitals. It's not the case, 40,000 cases in UK, so long as the hospitals are okay, they are not worried. America also is gone up to 30, 40,000. But once your hospitals are strained, you are in trouble. Because not only COVID, you can't look after heart disease, you can't look after cancer, you can't look after broken bone. So we are in trouble because of that. And we have to relieve that. How we relieve is a difficult thing. We have private hospitals and they are trying to decant to the private hospitals. Then the question of fees comes in. Who pays, how much to pay? So once you are able to decant and you are able to bring down the stress, it's just a question of time. India did it. See, India was very bad. No oxygen, people dying on the streets. But India did it. India's cases now under 40,000 a day. From 400,000, they brought in a 40,000 over time. So one day, we will bring it down. And when we bring it down and the hospitals are relieved, then you mustn't be worried about the case. Because we are going around testing a lot of people, You see, it's correct to test so as to try and isolate and then try and quarantine. So you've got to be very careful. Testing must be accompanied with contact tracing and quarantine. So it's not just testing. So I don't know whether we are putting enough, not just to test, but after that to quarantine. Do we have place to quarantine? Do we have the manpower to contact trace them? So it's very difficult. But we are learning. And now the problem is not the number of cases. Now the problem is the stress on our hospitals. And once we can get that under control, and I think we will, it's just a question of when. Why I'm so confident we will? Because everybody has done it. No matter how poor the country, how bad the country, once the peak comes, it will be followed by a downtrend, you see. Unfortunately, we are now not on the downtrend. So we still have to put up with it. And so what do we do? Well, I'm not employed to worry about these things, And if I talk too much, I can get into prison, you see. So there are many reasons why I don't know how to answer your question. But I do know what I have to do. And to all your audience, I hope you do the same thing, which is A, get vaccinated, B, maintain your health. Try to exercise, try to get enough sunshine because sunshine increases vitamin D. Vitamin D increases resistance. Some papers say vitamin D good for COVID, you see. So get enough sunshine, get your vitamin D, protect yourself against COVID, relieve stress. Don't think about money too much, enough rice, enough already, maybe not enough, eat less, lose weight, healthier. You got to think positive. And then you got to look at other people who have been worse. America, how many cases in Malaysia? Under 1 million case, you say, that's 3% of population. America, 10%, with 30 million our population, 1 million case is 3%. America, 300 million, there are 33 million, there are more than 10% of them have had it now. So we are not as bad as many other countries. So we must think positive for our own sake. Get vaccinated, stay healthy for your own sake. SOPs, wear your mask. I think that's what all of us can do. If all of us do that, we'll be in a very good place.
So you mentioned about the hospital situation. So Hock Lim, as a follow-up, with our hospitals full, when should we get admitted if tested positive? Example, is there an oxygen level threshold under which we should admit ourselves? I think, maybe he's talking about the oximeter.
Yes. I think this is a very good practical question. No? The first thing is, what can hospital do for you if you have COVID? And you have seen the TikTok, sorry, not TikTok, the TikTok and the videos that these people release. They go there, nothing is done. Because they are still okay. And some of them are so bored, they run away, you see. Fever, take Panadol. Rest, get enough hydration, eat. So if you are well like that, why you want to get admitted? But remember, you can spread disease. So it's very important. Protect your family. Studies have shown that within 1 week, 50% of family will get infected. So if you get infected, protect yourself, protect family, stay away from them, don't pass to them, But if you are healthy, don't get admitted. Because I think you go in queue 4 hours to be assessed and quarantine center, you will die there, your bladder will burst, the queue. So don't do. And then if you feel healthier day by day, okay. Now, what is the first thing you will not be healthy? You cannot breathe. You get breathless, you cannot do things, no appetite. I think if this kind of thing, you cannot get food in, then you got to seek help, you see. So, if you are tested positive, there should be places you can call. If you can't call, then you present yourself emergency room. But otherwise, I think look for your symptoms. More important than oxygen level, perhaps, is how you feel. You can eat, you can walk about, not get breathless. You can walk around, test yourself. Then for oxygen, I think anything above 95 should be considered quite normal. 95% saturation is quite normal.
Okay, so let's look at the results of the third poll. Nearly half, but most of the people are not willing to pay for a third dose. Okay, let's go for the last poll for today. Okay, it's related to the third poll as well, right? So if let's just say you were to pay, okay, how much are you willing to pay for a dose of COVID-19 vaccine? Okay, A, up to 50 ringgit, B, up to 100 ringgit, C, up to 200 ringgit, or D, beyond 200 ringgit, right? So join us on Facebook and click on the options below, A, B, C, or D, which will you be willing to pay. Don't worry, we won't know who chose which one, all right? Okay, so we have a question also from, about the vaccination of cucuk angin one.
Oh.
Okay. So Chu asks, what is your view about the authenticity of vaccines in the light of recent cucuk angin cases? Do you think vaccinators should show the vaccine bottle while filling the syringe before injecting into the arm?
Okay, I think as the recipient, is no need. As the recipient, if you are the recipient, I think you have to ask to look at the needle with the thing before and after. So politely ask them, and I think they will show. You can even go and Google what Kyrie said, take a screenshot of it and show them that, you want to see. I cannot understand how it could happen because I don't, it's got expiry time, even Sinovac should be normal refrigeration, and Pfizer once open cannot last on, So I don't understand how it happened, why it can happen, but it looks like it has happened. So just make sure it doesn't happen to you. As to why it happens, and these are issues outside our control, no? Whether it's a personal matter for the person, whether it's an institutional matter, the fellow is very unhappy, I don't know, but it's outside our description. Now, sometimes when we think too much about things that we cannot control, we make life difficult for ourselves. we have to learn. They say kita jaga kita. No, we protect ourselves. That's the most we can do. And I think the vaccinator is a medical personnel. I'm a medical personnel, and sometimes medical personnel react differently to different people in different circumstances. Sometimes you have a bad day, sometimes you have a good day. It is the job of the recipient to try to make life good for the recipient. If you have a happy vaccinator with you, you get better, So make sure you are vaccinated, look at it before and after. Try to make the process happy, If the process is happy, good for you, good for the fellow. And as to why some people are unhappy, we do not know. The people are committing suicide these days, and they're doing it publicly in pedestrian. So there's much unhappiness, there's much anger. As to whether it's because of that, that's why the vaccinator purposely didn't want, I don't know, or too tired, like they say. All these questions we cannot answer. It's sad that it's happening. That's the only thing we can say. It's sad. Just like it's sad to see people waiting for food, or like the Maidin fellow says, they don't steal TV sets now, they steal food, These are very sad things.
I think there are SOPs because I've gone for my own and I've brought my aunt, so I've seen how it is. So actually, there are two people. One person will actually fill the syringe and only pass on to the person that will inject in. So I'm not sure how, like what you said, that happens, that maybe that one they have shortage of people, and that's why only that same person has to be the one filling up. But I would think having a buddy system this way, it should reduce or even omit such things from happening. Okay, right. So we have another question. For my case, I didn't get to see the syringe, but for my aunt's case, they showed before and after. Okay, so Hock Lim was saying, is there a danger period for COVID-19 patients when we need to monitor after which we are over the danger period? For example, 10 days?
Okay, COVID is an acute infection. It's an infection. Infection, like I showed in the graph, it goes up and then it comes down. No? So a normal COVID ends after at most a week. That's why quarantine 2 weeks, And now they're reducing the quarantine. Sometimes they say 1 week enough. After a certain period, which is 1 to 2 weeks, the patient becomes well and is fully normal and cannot transmit it. That's the classical definition of COVID. Any complication that happens usually happens within the early part, so maybe the first week. That is the general thing. But in medicine, every general thing has exceptions. But please remember, that's the general thing. First week can be dangerous. After that, after second week, you should be perfectly well. But they have tested people and find that they never become negative. There have been cases early days when they quarantine people for months, 3 months, 4 months, and fellow keep testing positive but feel totally well. Then they say you can be positive, but you cannot spread. You can go out. But now they say, you can have long COVID. Now, long COVID means you can recover from COVID, but you still feel fatigued and all. Now, more than long COVID, they say you can suffer from adverse effects. That means COVID germ introduces an autoimmune reaction in your body. You can get heart inflammation, myocarditis. You can get nerve problems, neuropathy from COVID. You can get lung disease that it damages your lung. There are even people who say it can cause infertility and things like that. So you may have this. As to whether a particular patient will get or don't get, the actual incidence is unknown. Some say as high as 10%, 20%, or more. We do not know, not enough data yet. I think for a patient to be well, you must think positive. So if you have survived 1 week of COVID, you tell yourself, good, I've survived 1 week. If you have survived 2 weeks, you say, well, I'm very good. I can't spread even to other people. And the more positive you are, the faster you'll recover, and hopefully the less the effects that you are going to have. If you start talking about just bad effects, side effects, and what the worst can be, there's no end to such talk. And that's why people commit suicide, because they see only the bad and the end, you see, which we mustn't do with or without COVID, you see.
Okay, so Willie has a question on, can COVID vaccine trigger vasculitis?
Yes. COVID vaccine triggers inflammation. That's why you get pain. It's the pain is not the pain of the injection. If it's the pain of injection, you feel it immediately. As time goes on, it gets less and less. This one, the pain comes on after some time. So it's obviously getting inflammation there. For me, I became very itchy, you see. For people who had heart inflammation, it can be dangerous. And then there's this famous example of this weightlifter in Singapore after vaccination went lifting weights and had a cardiac arrest. So it can trigger inflammation of the nerves, as I said, of the heart, of the blood vessels. And that's why they get this extra thing of the low platelets, the reaction to the platelet and the reaction of the vessel causing blood clot, and at the same time of the platelet causing platelet drop. So yes, vaccines can do that. But always remember, it's a rarity. So you have to get vaccinated. And always remember that actually the progress made in treating these adverse effects is fantastic. Under normal circumstance, the low platelet blood clot extra thing is pre-lethal, is pre-death, very bad. But now they can treat it. They found the things to treat it. Under normal circumstance, when you talk of myocarditis, it's also very bad news. Get recut and all. But now, no, they seem to be able to overcome the acute phase and don't let it get complications. So there's a tremendous amount of effort put into these diseases and reactions, and much progress in treatment. So yes, you have to watch out for possible effects. So I think after vaccination, don't push yourself. Give yourself about 1-2 weeks of rest. Don't push yourself. Beware that your body might not be what it is. Relax more. Adequate hydration is important. I think adequate rest, hydration, and look after your bodily needs. Actually, we have a lot of natural needs that we ignore badly. Like a simple one is passing urine. I've seen a patient holding bladder because cannot pass urine, and the blood pressure went so high that the fellow went into heart failure, cannot breathe. So the very simple things like passing urine is actually can be very bad if you hold it. Don't stress yourself.
Really, as a follow-up question, for those with allergy issue with vaccine, can they still go for COVID vaccination?
Yes. When you talk allergy, everything is allergy. You take seafood, you take, some people drink, you get allergy. The allergy that we say is serious is anaphylaxis. In anaphylaxis, you get swelling of the breathing pipe, where your pipe gets narrowed, your eyes swollen, the neck gets swollen, and your pipe narrow and you can't breathe, your blood pressure can drop. So in anaphylaxis, you cannot do. But other than an allergy of anaphylaxis, and most of us don't have that. If you have anaphylaxis allergy, you either need an EpiPen to rescue you, or you'll be admitted to hospital, or you will die. It's very bad time. And you have heard of people taking peanut and then die. So unless you have that type of allergy, you should be taking the vaccine. But you declare it and they watch over you for a longer period. But even if you don't get the allergy, your body inside can be reacting. So give yourself some time to rest.
My friend has allergy and was also advised to actually take the vaccination at the hospital instead rather than the PPV. So medical attention is there for her. Okay, so let's have the results for the fourth poll. Okay, looks like the majority are willing to pay not that much, either 50 ringgit or up to 100 ringgit. So the majority not willing to pay more than that. But I think hepatitis vaccines are more expensive, if not mistaken, 200-300 if I'm not wrong. Hepatitis vaccine, and hepatitis vaccine is not that life-threatening if you don't take it. It is an option. But COVID being one that may be life-threatening, maybe our audience should consider to up their willingness to pay for the booster shot.
Actually, it's very complicated when you add money in with medicine. It's very, very difficult. And that's where I think a lot of problems can come. It's very difficult. Should the government pay? Should we pay? Should we pay so that we get faster? And I think that today Najib has put on his Facebook that somebody went into hospital for COVID for 2 weeks, and the bill came for 10 days or something, 2 weeks, and the bill came to 200,000 or something like 200,000 ringgit. So
private hospital.
Private hospital, private healthcare can be very expensive.
Yeah. Okay. Right. I think somebody shared to the friend to say that anaphylaxis can take vaccine. So I think there have been some people hesitant or unsure about that. So with your explanation, I think
Unless
they-
anaphylaxis, actually the classical contraindication is if you have anaphylactic reaction to a similar vaccine, but where got you previously people got mRNA vaccine now. So if you have been vaccinated and get anaphylaxis, then you cannot take. But unless you are like that, you generally should now. But I think if you've got a history of anaphylaxis with anything, you then should tell them. Then maybe they'll be far more careful with you or whatever, But other than that, allergy, everybody got allergy. Shouldn't be contraindication.
Yeah. Okay. So, Dr. Ong, we have taken up quite a bit of your time, nearly 2 hours. So, anything that you want to say before we wrap up?
I think it's important, get vaccinated. I think it's important to know that vaccine is only part of the solution. We must SOP after that. We must know what vaccine can and cannot do. The vaccine can prevent severe disease, so good for you. But the vaccine cannot prevent infection, so not so good to spread it around. So you can still spread it around. You can infect people. You can catch disease. So please, to protect society, you must SOP, you see. But you have to get vaccinated. I think that's the message. And then please disregard a lot of marketing propaganda, whether political or commercial. It's very dangerous nowadays.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Ong, for spending your time with us, nearly 2 hours. We thank you for your sharing, for your research, and hope you and everyone at HT Ong Heart Clinic stay safe and healthy always.
Thank you very much.
That's all we have for today. Thank you for being with us since 3 p.m. We would like to thank Greatech for sponsoring this episode of Science Stream. Get vaccinated and do your part to stop the spread of COVID-19. Stay safe and stay healthy always.